Hi everybody, this is Alan. We're finally done with chapter 2. I did spend an awful lot of time on it, but that's because there's a lot to it, and also it's very fundamental to a lot of the other techniques that we'll be using in future chapters. Okay, so I really did want to beat it to death. It also has a great deal of usefulness to you in understanding the basics of financial mathematics. Now we move on to chapter 3, in which we're going to talk about money, the financial markets, and interest in general. I am going to talk about specific markets later on. The beginning of the chapter, again, I'm starting on page 45. Please read it thoroughly. A lot of good stuff here, so I'm going to try to point out the highlights for you and emphasize some of the things that I really feel are takeaways, and of course things that we will be seeing again. Okay, so the first topic that we're dealing with is capital allocation. Some people have money and some people need money, okay? So let's give you all the money. You guys have saved and put money away, you've invested it. I am starting a business and I need it. I have to have a way to get my hands on it. Okay, so there are a couple of ways in which that happens. A good economic system, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned up here on the slide, involves the smooth and efficient flow of funds, okay? Like we saw in the barter system in chapter 1, okay, we can't waste a lot of time finding each other if you've got money and I need money, okay? We have to have a system in place that's going to make sure capital is allocated very efficiently and quickly from the people who have it to the people who need it, okay? Please remember throughout our discussions in this and other chapters that money, like any other commodity, most of you have taken economics, I assume. And by the way, economics was probably my worst subject in college, so I'm not going to turn this into an economics course. But a commodity goes through the rules of supply and demand, okay? Supply and demand have to meet at a point of equilibrium, as it's called, and that's usually the price that people will pay for that commodity. Supply and demand can change. Producers can produce more or less, and buyers can demand more or less. And where those two meet is usually what the price will be. Now, here's my point, ladies and gentlemen. Like anything else, I don't care whether it's a Three Musketeers bar or a gallon of gasoline, there is supply and demand. That applies to financial instruments too. What drives stock prices up and down? Well, supply and demand. If a lot of people want to get their hands, for example, on what's my favorite stock? One of my favorites is Verizon. Okay, so if a lot of people want to get their hands on some Verizon common stock because they feel that there's good news there and they'll make money, their demand is going to push the price of that stock up. Conversely, if everyone wants to dump their Verizon stock all at the same time and take profits, that's going to create an excess and the price will tend to come down. Okay, so the rules of supply and demand apply to financial instruments as well. Guess what? It applies to money also, okay? Money, the size of the money supply, is something that's controlled by the Federal Reserve Bank. More on that in a moment. The Federal Reserve can increase the money supply or decrease it. And when they do, based on the laws of supply and demand, that's going to affect how much is available for us to get our greedy little hands on, and at what cost. Okay, so hold that thought. Just please remember for the time being that, like other commodities, money itself is subject to the rules of supply and demand. Okay? Now, getting money from you to me, you the saver, me the needer, okay, can happen by two avenues, directly or indirectly. Okay? In a direct transfer, I'm kind of moving over on page 46 now, you and I know each other. And this happens in my business, for example, in high precision biomedical manufacturing. I know a lot of people who might have money, business owners like myself, and all of a sudden I decided I want to put on a new expansion in my factory. I went through this when I was building a new tool room, for example, and I happen to know that you've got money, and you know I need money, and we like each other, and we negotiate. That's a direct transfer. We know each other. We don't have to involve anybody else. Well, aside from our lawyers, of course, but we can make it happen between us. Okay? So it is quite common in a small business setting for a direct transfer to happen. Okay? However, in the broader picture, that's harder to make happen, especially since so much happens with e-commerce these days. You might be sitting on a beach in Cancun, or you might be up in the Pacific Northwest, and here I am in humble little Rhode Island or Massachusetts, and we need to find each other, know each other, make a deal happen. So in all likelihood, somehow we'll have to involve a middle person, okay? So a direct transfer can happen, but it's not quite as common as the need to involve somebody to expedite what happens between us. That, friends, is called an indirect transfer. We don't know each other. It's hard for us to find each other. We don't have time for that. We want to make business happen, okay? So we need someone between us to go back to that first slide, ensure that the flow of funds happens between us smoothly, flawlessly, and efficiently, okay? That's a good financial system. Okay, we have two types. The middle person that brings us together, ladies and gentlemen, can either be an investment banker or what we call a financial intermediary, okay? In both cases, there's a middle person involved, and that makes this a so-called indirect transfer, okay? We're going to start with the investment banker. Now, an investment banker fulfills a lot of functions, okay? They can be a consultant. They can make purchases and sales of companies happen. Generally speaking, however, one of the key roles of the investment banker is to underwrite, okay? They're going to bring us together and take on a direct role and figure out exactly what the best mechanism for me to get my hands on money is, okay? I am the demander of funds. Okay, so the investment banker in that role, of the many roles they can pursue, is called the underwriter. That means they're going to take on some risk, okay? Now, please remember, whenever you take on risk, you expect a certain reward to go along with it. Underwriting simply means that this financial intermediary, this indirect person, this middle person, I don't want to call them an intermediary, my apologies for that, is going to have to somehow involve themselves in the deal in order to make it happen. I need money, that's all I care about. I don't want to waste time negotiating with you if you're the other person. I say to my investment banker, make this happen, structure a deal, get me money, get it into my hands, I've got a business to run. Okay? The investment banker will expedite that process, and again, that is called underwriting. Okay? That means they have to price the deal properly. Okay? They are going to essentially give me money. I need $10 million. Okay, they're going to put a deal together. They're going to give me $10 million, and they are going to make sure that they get their $10 million back by selling whatever it is I've got in the market. Maybe I issued stock. I don't want to sit there and issue stock to you and you and you and you individually. I just want my $10 million bucks. The investment banker takes on the risk of saying, Alan, here's $10 million. I will now take $10 million of your capital stock. I'm issuing stock for the first time. It could be bonds. It can be any one of a number of vehicles. And the investment banker will sell it to the public and get the $10 million back. Okay? Now, the thing is, they have to price the deal very, very accurately. If they price the deal too high, no one in the public will buy it, or very few will buy it, and they're going to be stuck. The investment banker will be stuck holding some of this new issue in their inventory. They may want that, but probably they don't. They want their money back, okay? So if they price my stock too high, that's a problem that can happen. Okay, now again, they're taking on a risk because they've advanced me the money already. Now, what happens if they price my stock too low? Well, everyone's going to grab it because you guys all see a beautiful opportunity to own a piece of my company. So everyone's going to buy it. What's the problem with that? The problem is, I want to say to the investment banker, you priced the deal too low. I left money on the table. I could have gotten more. Okay? So there's a lot of finesse here. The investment banker has to make sure that they price the deal just right. So it flies, so I'm happy. And I tell you, if I'm not happy, I will make it known. And that investment banker's reputation will suffer. So they take on a great amount of risk. They are extremely, extremely well paid. When I sold my company, Accutech, I actually ended up paying my investment banker, even though it was a moderately sized company, over $125,000. These people take on risk and they're well paid. And when I first issue stock, my company when I first issue stock or bonds or anything like that, we call that the primary market. I'm going to issue stock. I issue stock in my company. That means you guys can buy a little piece of my ownership, and I get your money. Okay? That is the primary market. That's the only time I get money. Okay, keep that thought in mind because I'm going to differentiate that from something else later. All right, so that's what the investment banker does. They're a direct party. They are a conduit. They're going to make sure that by their involvement that they get your money into my hands, and they'll take a piece of it for themselves. Okay, here's the second type of indirect transfer person, the financial intermediary, and you've all dealt with them right along. It simply means banks, credit unions, mutual funds, okay? Any financial institution where some people deposit money as they save it, and other people can draw it out as they need it. So a financial intermediary like your bank, our friendly neighborhood bank down here in Franklin, Dean Bank or Rockland Trust, okay, they are going to receive funds from savers and they're going to pay you interest. Now you all know that banks aren't paying a great amount of interest right now. Everything is cyclical. Interest rates at some point will come way back up again, then way down again. Okay, in the first decade of the 21st century, the trend has been downward on interest rates. Okay, now what does the bank do? The banks don't want to sit on that money. No, the banks want to put that money to work. They want to generate revenues. They want to generate profits. They want to generate cash flow, just like any business person would. So they are going to take every dollar they legally can possibly get away with, and they're going to seek out people like me who need it and make loans to me. And they're going to charge me interest. Okay? Now, they're going to charge me a higher rate of interest, the demander, then they're going to pay you, the saver, and that spread is one of the ways that they make revenue. Okay? I refer to it in the third point on this slide as profit. It's not really profit, those of you who are into accounting. It's more like revenue. If you want to know more about that and don't feel like cracking your accounting textbook, drop me a note and I'll explain it, okay? But that basically is how banks, as a revenue center, generate their revenues, by the spread between what they're charging me for interest and what they're paying you in interest, okay? Now, the thing about the financial intermediary is like this. Unlike a direct transfer, we never need to meet, we never need to know each other. We're faceless. There's no transaction cost, like in the Chapter 1 barter system. The capital allocation is more efficient and it's faster. Okay? All right. What's the difference between those two indirect transfers, an investment banker and a financial intermediary? Okay? It's the role that they play. The investment banker is a conduit, as I often call them. They're going to pass through my securities, my stock, Allen's company stock, to you, the investor, okay? On the other hand, the financial intermediary is issuing its own paperwork to both of us, okay? We never will know who each other are, okay? They are going to accept your money, and they are going to accept my loan, the loan agreement, okay? So they are putting their own paper into the fray. The investment banker is not. Please know those differences, okay? The difference between a direct and indirect transfer, and under the umbrella of the indirect transfer, the difference between an investment banker and a financial intermediary. Okay? And we're vacillating all around page 46 and 47 at this point, friends. We move on now. Okay. All right, I explain the money markets versus capital markets. Sounds fancy, but the distinction is very simple. It's time, okay? Money markets usually are less than 1 year, okay? Capital markets are beyond 1 year. So when we say short term, we usually mean within a year. Intermediate in financial parlance means between 1 and 10 years. Long term is usually more than 10 years, okay? But the difference between money markets and capital markets, again, is time. Think of money markets as a year or less, okay? All right, now I'm going to talk a lot about the T-bill. The United States Treasury bill, it is a short-term obligation of the United States government. It's considered to be the safest investment basically in the world. It's considered risk-free. It's the gold standard. It's the bar, okay? That's where being risk-free begins. That means everything else that does have greater elements of risk, any other financial instrument in the world, is going to be compared to the T-bill, the US T-bill. So please keep in mind what a T-bill is. It is short-term, it is extremely, extremely liquid, and it's considered almost as good as cash itself. Okay? It is an instrument of the money market. Why? Because it's a year or less. A T-bill, by definition, has a maturity date of less than a year. Okay? Another example of an instrument in the money market, and these are all in my book on page 48, would be high-grade commercial paper. That means a major company like General Motors, General Electric, Verizon, Coca-Cola. It's an IOU from them. And I think they're not going anywhere anytime soon. So an IOU from Coca-Cola is pretty darn good as a short-term instrument. Okay? I mentioned a few others here. I do not hold you responsible for understanding the definitions of these, but read them on page 48, okay? And understand one thing about them. The thing they all have in common is they are short-term and they are instruments of the money market, not the capital market, okay? Here are some examples, moving over on page 48 to the top of 49, of the capital market. T-notes and T-bonds. Those are still instruments of the United States government, but they have longer maturity dates. A treasury note matures in more than a year, but less than 10 years. A T-bond matures in more than 10 years, okay? They're all still good, solid investments from the U.S. government. The only difference between them? Timing. Timing of when they mature for payment, okay? When I say mature, it means that payment is due. If you have one and it matures, you turn it in and get your money, okay? Common stock and preferred stock, you learn the difference between those two things, and I'll talk more about them in my course, but you learn the difference in your financial accounting course. I hope you remember that. We'll explore it again. But those are instruments of the capital market. So are mortgages. Chances are that if you have a mortgage, if you are a mortgagor, the bank is the mortgagee, okay, the one who actually has the claim. Chances are that that mortgage will be sold. Sometimes banks bundle them together and sell them to a third party, okay? So there is a market for them. So therefore, mortgages can become an instrument of the capital market. Corporate bonds, all right? A lot of times corporations will not issue more of their stock. Instead, they will issue bonds, long-term debt. So instead of financing with ownership, with equity, they're financing by really borrowing money from you. That's what a corporate bond is. And of course, municipal bonds, that's the same thing, except instead of a corporation issuing the bond, a city or state government is issuing the bond. For example, well, they built a nice big school here in Franklin a few years ago, and they financed it with municipal bonds, okay? And as the town collects tax revenues from Franklin taxpayers, then it will be able to pay off those bonds, the interest and the principal as they mature. Okay, so those are all examples. This is not an exclusive list, obviously, but these are examples of items in the capital market rather than the money market. Okay, I spent a little time on page 49 revisiting money a little bit. At one point, back in the early 20th century and before, there was an amount of precious metal in back of the US dollar. What's in back of the money you carry around now in your wallet? Basically, nothing other than the good faith and credit of the United States. Okay, but everybody recognizes that, and that's what gives the money in your wallet right now its value. We call it fiat money, F-I-A-T. I don't mean like the car. I mean like papal fiat, okay? If you're a Catholic, you know that when the Pope says something, that's called papal fiat. It means it's because the Pope says so. In Latin, fiat means let it be so, okay? So because the government says that your money is worth something, and because the world recognizes that, and because we all agree to it, then that is what gives our money its value, okay? Look at the front of one of your dollar bills. It's going to say this instrument is legal tender for all debts, public and private. All right? That means that the government is saying this money is good. Okay? There was a big thing if you lived through the Depression era, the 1930s, where people lost confidence in the banking system and they would stuff their mattresses with money, they'd put it in strong boxes, they'd hide it under their floors, hollow trees, whatever. Okay? That is a terrible, terrible thing to do because when you put cash away today, a year from now, it's not going to be worth as much because of inflation. Inflation was very high in the late 70s and into the 80s. Now inflation is relatively, in certain pockets, on the low side. Okay? But please remember, hoarding cash is bad. More on that as we go. Okay? I need you to know this, ladies and gentlemen. There are sometimes 7, but generally people agree, 6 different ways that the money supply is measured. I'm only going to hold you responsible for these 2, M1 and M2. In my next video lecture, I'll pick up from here and tell you exactly what M1 and M2 means. And in the meantime, please make sure you keep up on all of the assignments that I've posted for Chapter 2. And I'll post some Chapter 3 assignments in the next couple of days. And get to me with any questions, and happy reading. Take care. Have yourself a good rest of your Memorial Day weekend. I'll be in touch tomorrow. Bye-bye.